The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Ridge Hills as Dr. Elaine Carter pulled her SUV into the driveway of the Victorian house she had just purchased. The blue and white two-story home with its wraparound porch had been on the market for months, its price steadily dropping until it fell within her budget. After 15 years of apartment living, Elaine finally had a place to call her own. She stepped out of her car wearing faded jeans and an old university sweatshirt, her hair tied back in a simple scarf. The moving truck wouldn't arrive for another hour, giving her time to walk through the empty rooms one more time and plan where everything would go. As she climbed the steps to the porch, keys jingling in her hand, she noticed curtains moving in the house next door. Elaine wasn't surprised. Oak Ridge Hills was known as one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Westlake City. The last census had shown it was 92% white, with most homes passed down through generations or sold through private networks. That she had managed to buy in at all had been something of a miracle. The previous owner had died without heirs, and the bank was eager to sell. "It's a beautiful day to move in," she said aloud to herself, unlocking the front door. The house smelled of fresh paint and wood polish. The real estate agent had insisted on these final touches before closing the deal. "A house like this needs to shine," she had said. Inside, Elaine's footsteps echoed through the empty rooms. She walked slowly, touching the walls, smiling at the thought of hanging her mother's paintings in the living room. The kitchen needed updating, but the hardwood floors throughout were original and in perfect condition. The previous owner had maintained the house meticulously for over 40 years. The sound of a car door slamming pulled her attention back outside. Through the front window, she saw an older couple standing at the edge of her property, staring at the house with concerned expressions. The woman whispered something to the man, who nodded and frowned. "Might as well get this over with," Elaine muttered, heading back to the front door. She had been the first black woman elected mayor of Westlake City 6 months ago, but her face hadn't been in the papers much since the inauguration. She wasn't surprised that her new neighbors didn't recognize her. Before she reached the door, the moving truck rounded the corner, followed by her brother's pickup truck. The couple on the sidewalk stepped back, watching as the vehicles parked. "Hey, sis," her brother called, climbing out of his truck. "Got here as fast as I could." Traffic was a nightmare on the highway. "Thanks for coming, Andre," she said, giving him a quick hug. "I didn't expect you until later." "And miss the chance to boss around professional movers?" "No way." He grinned, then noticed the couple still watching from the sidewalk. "Friends of yours?" "Not yet," Elaine said, "but I'm hoping to change that." The moving crew began unloading furniture while Elaine directed them on where each piece should go. Andre helped with the smaller boxes, carrying them to the appropriate rooms based on their labels. The couple had disappeared, but Elaine noticed other neighbors had taken their place, watching the activity from a distance. By mid-afternoon, the larger furniture was in place. Elaine paid the movers and thanked them for their work. The summer heat had intensified, and sweat dampened her shirt as she and Andre carried the last few boxes from his truck to the house. "Want me to stay and help unpack?" Andre asked, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "No need," Elaine said. "I want to take my time with that part. Besides, you've got to pick up the kids from soccer practice." "You're right about that. Lisa will kill me if I'm late again." He gave her a quick hug. "Call me if you need anything. And try to make some friends, okay? Don't just bury yourself in work like you always do." "I'll try," she promised, though they both knew her schedule as mayor left little time for socializing. After Andre left, Elaine decided to tackle the yard. The moving had stirred up dirt and leaves, and several plants in the front garden needed attention. She changed into fresh clothes and grabbed the gardening tools she'd packed separately. The late afternoon sun was gentler now, and the physical work helped clear her mind. She had been so busy with budget meetings and infrastructure planning that she had barely had time to process the fact that she was now a homeowner. As she pulled weeds from around the rose bushes, she felt a sense of pride. Her parents hadn't lived to see her become mayor or buy this house, but she knew they would have been proud too. "Excuse me." Elaine looked up to find an older woman standing on the sidewalk, clutching a small dog to her chest. The woman wore expensive-looking clothes and perfectly styled gray hair. "Hello," Elaine said, standing up and brushing dirt from her hands. "I'm Mrs. Reynolds from across the street," the woman said, making no move to come closer. "We were wondering what you're doing to the Peterson house." "I'm planting some new flowers," Elaine said, gesturing to the garden bed. The previous owner left the garden in good shape, but these areas needed some color. No, I mean, why are you here? Are you the new housekeeper? Mrs. Peterson always had help come on Tuesdays. Elaine took a deep breath. She had encountered this kind of assumption many times before. At medical conferences during her years as a doctor, at fundraising events when she first entered politics, and now here, in front of her own home. I'm the new owner, she said simply. Mrs. Peterson passed away last year and I bought the house from the bank last month. The sale was finalized yesterday. Mrs. Reynolds' eyes widened slightly and she took a small step back. Oh, I see. Well, welcome to the neighborhood, I suppose. Her tone suggested this welcome wasn't entirely sincere. Thank you, Elaine said, determined to remain polite. I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone. Yes, well. Mrs. Reynolds glanced around the yard, her gaze lingering on the boxes visible through the front door. This is a very quiet neighborhood. We value our privacy and traditions here. I understand, Elaine said. I'm quite busy with work, so I'm not planning any wild parties, if that's what concerns you. What kind of work do you do? Mrs. Reynolds asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. Public service, Elaine answered, choosing not to elaborate. She didn't want special treatment because of her position, and she certainly didn't want to be accused of flaunting her title to intimidate her new neighbors. Mrs. Reynolds nodded stiffly. Well, good day then. She turned and walked away, her small dog looking back over her shoulder at Elaine. As the evening approached, Elaine continued working in the garden, aware that she was being watched from several houses. She saw curtains move, people stepping onto porches only to retreat when she looked their way, and cars slowing as they drove past. It was as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. At one point, she noticed two men talking while looking in her direction. One of them was taking pictures with his phone. Elaine waved at them, and they quickly walked away. By sunset, she had finished the garden and was sitting on her porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the neighborhood settle into evening routines. Lights came on in windows, sprinklers turned off, and children were called inside for dinner. A young couple walked by with a stroller, and Elaine smiled and waved. The woman gave a hesitant wave back, but the man quickly urged her to keep walking. As darkness fell, Elaine went inside and began unpacking the kitchen boxes. Through the window, she noticed a group of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk in front of the house across the street. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward her home. Give it time, she told herself as she arranged plates in the cabinet. They'll either come around or they won't. Her phone rang, the special ringtone she had set for work calls. Another water main break downtown needed her attention. Elaine sighed, putting down the mug she'd been unwrapping. It was going to be another late night of crisis management. At least she would be coming home to her own house when it was over, even if the welcome was colder than she had hoped. As she grabbed her keys and headed for the door, she noticed a business card had been slipped under her door. It was from the Oak Ridge Hills Neighborhood Association, with a handwritten note on the back. Monthly meeting this Thursday, 7 p.m. Attendance is expected. Elaine smiled slightly as she tucked the card into her pocket. Thursday would certainly be interesting. 3 days had passed since Elaine moved into her new home in Oak Ridge Hills. Despite working late at City Hall each night, she had managed to unpack most of her belongings. The house was slowly beginning to feel like home, with family photos on the mantel and her grandmother's quilt draped over the living room sofa. Tonight, she had left work early, determined to finish setting up her garden before the neighborhood meeting tomorrow. The evening was perfect for outdoor work, warm with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of nearby flowering trees. Elaine changed into an old t-shirt and shorts, then gathered her gardening tools and the solar-powered walkway lights she had ordered online. The previous owner had maintained a lovely garden, but the pathway leading to the front door was dark at night, and Elaine had nearly tripped twice coming home late. As she worked, digging small holes along the walkway for the solar lights, she noticed more neighbors than usual walking past her house. Some slowed down to stare while others quickened their pace and avoided eye contact altogether. No one stopped to introduce themselves. Evening, Elaine called out to an older man walking his dog. He nodded stiffly and hurried away, pulling his reluctant dog along. Elaine sighed and continued working. She hadn't expected a warm welcome, but the complete avoidance was starting to feel ridiculous. As mayor, She was used to dealing with difficult people in tense situations, but this silent treatment in her own neighborhood was wearing on her nerves. She had just finished installing the fifth light when a shadow fell across the lawn. Looking up, Elaine saw Mrs. Reynolds standing at the edge of her property, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Next to her stood a thin man with glasses who Elaine hadn't seen before. "Good evening," Elaine said, rising to her feet and brushing dirt from her hands. "What exactly are you doing to the landscaping?" Mrs. Reynolds asked, her voice sharp. "This property is part of a historic neighborhood, you know." "Just adding some solar lights along the walkway," Elaine explained, gesturing to the small fixtures. "They're not permanent installations, they just stake into the ground." The man beside Mrs. Reynolds frowned. "There are neighborhood guidelines about exterior modifications." "I've read them," Elaine said, having thoroughly reviewed all homeowner documents before closing. "Solar garden lights that don't require electrical work are permitted." Section 4, Paragraph C of the guidelines. Both neighbors looked surprised that she was familiar with the rules. "I'm George Miller, head of the neighborhood association," the man said, his tone slightly less hostile now. "My wife and I live 2 doors down." He didn't offer his hand. "Nice to meet you. I'm Elaine Carter." She waited for a flicker of recognition at her name, but saw none. "Well, Miss Carter," Mrs. Reynolds said, emphasizing the Ms. as if it were somehow improper. "We're all quite curious about how you came to purchase this home." The implication was clear, and Elaine felt a familiar heat rise in her chest. The same feeling she'd had during her campaign when opponents suggested she wasn't right for the role. She took a deep breath before responding. "Bought it from First National Bank after the previous owner passed without heirs. My real estate agent found it for me. It was a standard sale, nothing unusual about it. But this house was never officially on the market," Mr. Miller insisted. "We keep track of these things." "It was in probate for nearly a year," Elaine explained patiently. "The bank took ownership when no heirs came forward and they listed it quietly. I'm sure if you check the county records, everything is in order." Mrs. Reynolds pursed her lips. "It's just that homes in this neighborhood typically sell to people who have connections here. Family members of current residents or colleagues from the country club. I don't have those connections," Elaine admitted. "But I do have good credit and a stable job." "And what job is that exactly?" Mr. Miller asked, his eyes narrowing. Before Elaine could decide how to answer, a car pulled into her driveway. Her assistant, Tanya, stepped out carrying a stack of folders. "Mayor Carter, I'm so sorry to bother you at home, but these contracts need your signature before tomorrow morning's meeting with the Transit Authority." Tanya hurried up the walkway, then stopped short when she noticed the neighbors. "Oh, sorry. Am I interrupting?" A look of shock passed between Mrs. Reynolds and Mr. Miller. "Mayor?" Mrs. Reynolds repeated, her voice suddenly much higher than before. "Yes," Elaine said simply. "I've been serving as mayor of Westlake City since January." Mr. Miller's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "You're that Elaine Carter? The one who was on the billboards during the election?" "The very same," Elaine said, unable to keep a small smile from forming. "Though I've lost the fancy suits and professional makeup for my gardening today. We didn't," Mrs. Reynolds stammered. "It's fine," Elaine said. "I'm off duty right now, just trying to get my new home in order." "Tanya, why don't you come inside and I'll look at those contracts?" "Certainly, Mayor," Tanya said, eyeing the neighbors with barely concealed amusement. She had worked with Elaine long enough to recognize what had been happening. As they turned toward the house, Mr. Miller called out, "Will you be attending tomorrow's neighborhood meeting?" "I'm planning to," Elaine replied over her shoulder. "Looking forward to meeting everyone properly." Inside, Elaine closed the door and let out a long breath. "Rough welcome?" Tanya asked, setting the folders on the kitchen counter. "About what I expected," Elaine said, washing her hands at the sink. "Nothing I haven't dealt with before." "Want me to spread the word around town about how they're treating the mayor?" Tanya offered, only half joking. "Absolutely not," Elaine said firmly. "I don't want special treatment. I just want to be treated like any other homeowner." She paused, then added, "Well, any other homeowner who happens to read the neighborhood guidelines thoroughly." They spent the next hour going through contracts and budget proposals. When Tanya left, Elaine returned to her gardening, determined to finish before dark. The neighbors had disappeared, but she could see faces watching from windows. The sun was setting when a car slowed in front of her house. Rather than continuing past like the others, this one parked. A woman about Elaine's age stepped out carrying a covered dish. "Hi there," the woman called, walking up the driveway. "I'm Diane from down the street. Thought you might like some dinner after all that unpacking and gardening." Surprised by the friendly gesture, Elaine stood up. "That's incredibly kind of you," Diane shrugged. "It's just lasagna. Nothing fancy." She glanced around before adding in a lower voice, "Don't mind the Millers and Mrs. Reynolds. They act like they own the neighborhood, but they don't speak for all of us." "I appreciate that," Elaine said, accepting the dish. "Would you like to come in for a minute?" "Another time, maybe. My son has a school project I promised to help with." Diane hesitated. "Are you really the mayor?" Elaine nodded. "For the past 6 months." "Well, that's something," Diane said with a small laugh. "Wait till they find out they've been giving the cold shoulder to the most powerful person in the city." "I'm hardly that," Elaine said. "The city council might disagree with you." "Still," Diane said, "it's nice to have a neighbor with some actual importance. The way some people around here talk, you'd think having a grandfather who belonged to the right clubs was the highest achievement possible." After Diane left, Elaine finished installing the last few solar lights. The walkway looked beautiful as the lights began to glow in the deepening twilight. She gathered her tools and headed inside, looking forward to trying Diane's lasagna. As she ate dinner at her new kitchen table, Elaine reviewed her notes for tomorrow's transit meeting. Halfway through, her phone buzzed with a text from Andre. "How's the new place? Neighbors warming up yet?" She wrote back, "House is great. Some neighbors need time. One brought lasagna. Progress." Andre responded with a thumbs-up emoji and, "Want me to come by this weekend and help with any heavy lifting?" "All good for now," she replied. "But come for dinner Sunday? I'll cook." After setting her phone aside, Elaine walked through each room of her new home, making mental notes of what still needed to be done. In the study, she paused to look out the window. The Millers' house was clearly visible, and she could see them in their living room, apparently having an animated discussion. Elaine turned away. Whatever they were saying about her didn't matter. She had earned her position as mayor through hard work and dedication to the city, and she had purchased this house legitimately. No amount of neighborhood gossip could change those facts. As she prepared for bed, Elaine heard voices outside. Peering through the bedroom curtains, she saw Mr. Miller standing on the sidewalk with 2 other men, all 3 looking toward her house. One of the men pointed at her newly installed solar lights now glowing softly in the darkness. "Not against the guidelines," Elaine murmured to herself as she let the curtain fall back into place. She had faced opposition before, and had always found that the best response was to continue doing her job well. The same principle would apply here. She would be a good neighbor and a good homeowner, regardless of how others treated her. Tomorrow would bring the neighborhood meeting, and Elaine was prepared for whatever reception awaited her there. But for tonight, she had a comfortable bed in her very own home, and that was more than enough. The next evening after work, Elaine decided to skip the neighborhood meeting. A water main break downtown had kept her at City Hall until nearly 8 o'clock, and by the time she changed clothes and drove home, the meeting would be half over. Besides, after yesterday's encounter with the Millers and Mrs. Reynolds, she wasn't in a rush to face a room full of neighbors who might share their views. Instead, she changed into comfortable clothes and decided to finish setting up her backyard. The previous owner had left behind a stone fire pit surrounded by Adirondack chairs. Elaine arranged them in a circle and added outdoor string lights along the fence. It was peaceful work, and the evening was pleasantly warm. As darkness fell, she tested the string lights. They created a magical glow around the yard, reflecting off the surface of the small pond in the corner. Satisfied with her work, Elaine decided to enjoy her new outdoor space. She lit the fire pit, brought out a glass of wine and the book she'd been trying to finish for months, and settled into one of the chairs. She had just found her place in the book when she heard voices from the front of the house. Looking at her watch, she realized the neighborhood meeting must have ended. Through the side gate, she could see people walking past her house, some lingering on the sidewalk to talk. No one approached her door. Elaine returned to her reading, enjoying the crackling fire and the chorus of crickets. After about 20 minutes, she heard the sound of footsteps on her front walkway. She tensed, wondering if someone from the meeting had decided to confront her about missing it. The doorbell rang. Elaine marked her place in the book and walked through the house, turning on lights as she went. When she opened the front door, she was surprised to find Diane standing there with another woman she didn't recognize. "Hi," Diane said, smiling. "Sorry to bother you so late. This is my friend Patty from across the street. We just left the neighborhood meeting and saw your lights were on." "Come in," Elaine offered, stepping back from the door. "I was just sitting by the fire pit out back." "That sounds lovely," Patty said, following Diane inside. "We won't stay long. We just wanted to check on you since you missed the meeting." "Had to work late," Elaine explained, leading them through the house to the backyard. "There was an emergency downtown." "Being mayor sounds exhausting," Diane said as they stepped outside. "Oh, this is beautiful. Did the previous owner set all this up?" "The fire pit and chairs were here, but I added the lights," Elaine said, gesturing to the strings of bulbs. "Can I get you both something to drink? I have wine, water, or I could make coffee." "We're fine," Patty said, settling into one of the chairs. "We can't stay. Our husbands have the kids, and that never ends well if we're gone too long." Elaine smiled and took her seat again. "So how was the meeting? Did I miss anything important?" Diane and Patty exchanged glances. "Well," Diane began, "your name came up. Quite a bit, actually." "I'm not surprised," Elaine said, taking a sip of her wine. "The Millers told everyone you're the mayor," Patty said. "You should have seen their faces, trying to act like they'd known all along but clearly shocked. Mrs. Reynolds kept saying how interesting it was that you bought this house without anyone knowing," Diane added, making air quotes around the word interesting. "And then old Mr. Parker, he's lived here for 50 years, stood up and said, 'Well, at least she's not one of those loud college students. Remember when the Thompsons rented to those fraternity boys?' That sort of broke the tension." Elaine laughed. "Well, I can promise I won't be hosting any keg parties." "There was a vote about your solar lights," Patty said, looking slightly embarrassed. Mr. Miller tried to argue they weren't approved, but Diane's husband brought out a copy of the guidelines that clearly show they're allowed. "They voted on my lights?" Elaine asked, surprised. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Hills," Diane said dryly, "where everything from your mailbox design to the color of your garden hose is subject to committee approval." "The vote was 15-7 in favor of allowing your lights, by the way," Patty said. "Progress." The three women chatted for a while longer. Elaine learned that Diane was a pediatrician at the local hospital, and Patty taught 3rd grade at the elementary school. Both had lived in the neighborhood for about 5 years, and considered themselves outsiders compared to families like the Millers who had been there for generations. After they left, Elaine felt better about her new home. Maybe the neighborhood wasn't entirely unwelcoming after all. She put out the fire and went inside, looking forward to a quiet weekend of unpacking the last few boxes. The next day was Saturday, and Elaine woke early, excited to have a full day at home with no work obligations. She made coffee and carried it to the front porch, where she sat in a rocking chair watching the neighborhood come to life. People walked dogs, jogged, and collected their newspapers. A few waved at her, though most still pretended not to see her. By mid-morning, Elaine was in her backyard, planting herbs in containers for a small kitchen garden. The sound of a lawnmower next door provided a steady background noise as she worked, occasionally singing along to the music playing from her phone. The lawnmower stopped, and a moment later she heard Mr. Miller's voice from the other side of the fence. "Morning, Mayor Carter." Elaine looked up to see him standing by the gate, his expression unreadable. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she replied. "Nice day for yard work." He nodded, looking uncomfortable. "My wife wanted me to invite you to our barbecue next weekend. Just a small gathering of neighbors. Nothing formal." Elaine was surprised by the invitation but didn't show it. "That sounds nice. What can I bring?" "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just yourself." He paused, then added, "We didn't know you were the mayor when you moved in." "I gathered that," Elaine said, her tone neutral. "Would have changed things," he admitted. "Knowing who you were." Elaine stood up, brushing soil from her hands. "Mr. Miller, I appreciate the invitation, but I should be clear about something. I don't want special treatment because I'm the mayor. I bought this house as Elaine Carter, private citizen, not as a public official. I'd like my neighbors to get to know me for who I am, not what my job is." Mr. Miller frowned slightly, as if this concept was difficult to grasp. "But your position, it brings a certain prestige to the neighborhood. That shouldn't matter, Elaine said firmly. What should matter is whether I'm a good neighbor. If I maintain my property, follow the guidelines, and contribute positively to the community. He seemed about to argue, but then just nodded. The barbecue starts at 4. Hope you can make it. With that, he returned to his yard and started the lawnmower again. Elaine returned to her gardening, thinking about the interaction. The invitation was a step forward, even if Mr. Miller's reasons weren't entirely what she'd hoped for. Still, it was better than the cold shoulder she'd been getting. Around noon, Elaine decided to install the new mailbox she'd ordered. The old one was rusty and the door no longer closed properly. She gathered her tools in the new mailbox, which matched the style of the original but was in better condition. As she worked on removing the old mailbox from its post, she noticed a police car driving slowly down the street. It wasn't unusual to see police in residential areas, but something about the way the car moved, slowly, as if looking for something, caught her attention. The car came to a stop in front of her house. 2 officers got out and approached her, one male and one female. The male officer was older, with gray at his temples, while the female officer appeared to be in her 30s. "Afternoon, ma'am," the male officer said. "I'm Officer Rodriguez, and this is Officer Chen. We received a call about someone possibly damaging property at this address." Elaine looked at them in disbelief, then at the mailbox in her hands. "I'm replacing my mailbox," she said, gesturing to the new one sitting on the grass. "It's my house." Officer Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Yes, ma'am. We have to respond to all calls, even ones that—" He trailed off, glancing at his partner. "Even ones that waste police resources?" Elaine suggested, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Can I see some identification, please?" Officer Chen asked, her tone professional but gentle. Elaine set down the old mailbox. "My ID is inside. I'll get it." She walked into the house, aware of the officers following her to the door. From the corner of her eye, she could see neighbors watching from their windows and porches. She found her purse on the kitchen counter and pulled out her wallet. When she returned to the door, she handed her driver's license to Officer Chen, who looked at it carefully. As the officer was about to hand it back, Officer Rodriguez suddenly straightened. "Mayor Carter?" he asked, his eyes widening in recognition. "I didn't. We met at the police department fundraiser last month. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you right away." Elaine took back her ID. "It's fine, Officer Rodriguez. I wasn't wearing my work clothes then either." "Mayor?" Officer Chen looked between them, confused. "Mayor Elaine Carter," Rodriguez confirmed, now looking extremely uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I apologize for the disturbance. We received a call about a suspicious person tampering with property at this address. The caller didn't mention it was, well, you." "I just moved in last week," Elaine explained. "Some of my neighbors are still adjusting to having me here." Officer Chen's expression shifted as understanding dawned. "I see," she said, her voice tight. "Someone called in a suspicious person report on the mayor of Westlake City while she was changing her own mailbox." "Apparently so," Elaine said with a small smile. "Though I doubt they knew I was the mayor when they made the call." From across the street, Elaine could see Mrs. Reynolds watching from behind her curtain. Their eyes met briefly before Mrs. Reynolds quickly stepped back from the window. "Again, we apologize for the intrusion," Officer Rodriguez said. "If you need anything, please don't hesitate to call the station directly." "Thank you, officers," Elaine said. "I understand you were just doing your job." As the police returned to their car, neighbors who had been watching began to disappear from windows and porches. Elaine went back to installing her new mailbox, her movements deliberate and calm despite the anger bubbling inside her. By the time she finished, the street was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. She could feel it in the air. The police visit had exposed something ugly that could no longer be hidden behind polite smiles and neighborhood guidelines. Elaine gathered her tools and went inside. She had some phone calls to make. News of the police visit spread through Oak Ridge Hills like wildfire. By Sunday morning, Elaine's phone was buzzing with text messages from Diane and Patty, both expressing outrage and offering support. Her brother Andre called, concerned after hearing rumors about the incident. "You want me to come over?" he asked, his voice tight with anger. "This is exactly what I was worried about when you bought in that neighborhood." "I'm fine," Elaine assured him. "Nothing happened that I haven't dealt with before." "That doesn't make it okay," Andre said. "You're the mayor, for crying out loud." "They called the cops on the mayor." They didn't know that when they made the call, Elaine reminded him. And honestly, I'm not sure it would have mattered. After promising Andre she would still host him for dinner that evening, Elaine hung up and tried to enjoy her Sunday paper. She had just settled on the porch with coffee when a car she didn't recognize pulled into her driveway. A woman stepped out, dressed in a crisp pantsuit despite the weekend. She approached the porch with purpose, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "Mayor Carter, I'm Vanessa Wright from the Westlake Gazette. I was hoping I could get a comment about yesterday's incident." Elaine set down her coffee. "What incident would that be, Ms. Wright?" The reporter looked surprised. "The police being called to your home. We received a tip that someone in your neighborhood reported you as a suspicious person." "I see," Elaine said, keeping her expression neutral. "And who provided this tip?" "I'm afraid I can't reveal my sources," Vanessa said. "But I can tell you that several of your neighbors are quite upset about what happened. They think it reflects poorly on the neighborhood." "I'm sure they do," Elaine murmured. "Would you be willing to make a statement? Our readers would be very interested in your perspective as both the mayor and a new resident experiencing this kind of welcome." Elaine considered her options carefully. As mayor, everything she said could have political implications. As a new homeowner, she didn't want to alienate her entire neighborhood. But as a black woman who had just experienced a clear case of racial profiling, she had no intention of pretending nothing had happened. "I'll give you a brief statement," Elaine said finally. "Yesterday, while replacing my mailbox in front of my newly purchased home, someone called the police to report a suspicious person. The officers who responded were professional, and the situation was resolved quickly once they realized who I was." "And how did that make you feel?" Vanessa prompted, scribbling notes. "How would it make anyone feel?" Elaine countered. "But I'm not interested in dwelling on one unfortunate incident. I'm focusing on being a good neighbor and continuing to serve as mayor to all residents of Westlake City, including those in Oak Ridge Hills. Do you think race played a factor in the call?" Elaine met the reporter's gaze directly. "I think assumptions were made based on appearance rather than facts. Whether those assumptions were about race, class, or who belongs in this neighborhood, that's something the caller would have to answer." Vanessa looked like she wanted to press for more, but Elaine stood up. "That's all I have to say on the matter. If you'll excuse me, I have plans with my family today." After the reporter left, Elaine went inside and called her chief of staff, Thomas, to warn him about the likely newspaper article. "Want me to prepare a statement from the office?" he asked. "No," Elaine decided. "This isn't a city issue. It's a personal one. Let's keep it that way." "You know they'll try to make it political," Thomas warned. "Everything the mayor does is political." "Then we'll deal with it if it becomes a problem," Elaine said. "For now, let's focus on tomorrow's council meeting." They discussed city business for a while, and by the time Elaine hung up, she felt grounded again in the work that mattered most to her. She spent the afternoon cooking for Andre's visit, finding comfort in the familiar rituals of chopping vegetables and stirring sauces. Andre arrived with his wife Kendra and their 2 children, bearing flowers and a bottle of wine. The kids immediately wanted a tour of the house, excited to see their aunt's new home. "Backyard first," Kendra suggested, ushering the children through the house. "Let them burn off some energy before dinner." When they were alone in the kitchen, Andre studied his sister's face. "You okay, really?" "I'm angry," Elaine admitted, her voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. "But I'm not letting it get to me. I've worked too hard to get where I am." "You shouldn't have to deal with this," Andre said, shaking his head. "No one should," Elaine agreed. "But the reality is people do. Every day." "Yeah, but most of those people aren't the mayor," Andre pointed out. "You have power. You could make an example of whoever called the cops." Elaine sighed. "And what would that accomplish? Force an apology they don't mean? Create more resentment? I'm playing the long game here, Andre." Before he could respond, there was a knock at the front door. Elaine wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and went to answer it, surprised to find Mr. and Mrs. Miller standing on her porch looking uncomfortable. "Mayor Carter," Mr. Miller began, "we'd like a word if you have a moment." Elaine stepped outside, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. "I have family visiting right now, so I can only spare a few minutes." Mrs. Miller clutched her purse tightly. "We've come to express our concern about yesterday's unfortunate incident." "Unfortunate is one word for it," Elaine said. "We want you to know that whoever called the police doesn't represent the views of the entire neighborhood." Mr. Miller said stiffly. Elaine raised an eyebrow. So you didn't make the call? The couple exchanged glances. No, Mrs. Miller said after a pause. We did not. But you know who did, Elaine guessed. That's not important, Mr. Miller said quickly. What's important is that we, as representatives of the neighborhood association, want to ensure there are no misunderstandings going forward. What my husband means, Mrs. Miller interjected, is that we're concerned about the potential publicity. A reporter was seen on our street earlier today. Yes, she came to see me, Elaine confirmed. The Westlake Gazette is apparently running a story. The Millers both paled slightly. That would be unfortunate, Mr. Miller said. For the reputation of Oak Ridge Hills. And for property values, his wife added. Elaine studied them for a moment. What exactly are you asking me to do? Perhaps you could speak with the reporter again? Mrs. Miller suggested. Explain that it was all a misunderstanding. That you hold no ill will toward the neighborhood. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Elaine said calmly. Someone saw a black woman working on a mailbox and assumed she was vandalizing property rather than maintaining her own home. That's not a misunderstanding. That's prejudice. The Millers flinched at her directness. We're not racist, Mrs. Miller insisted, her voice rising slightly. This neighborhood has always been very selective about who moves in. It's about maintaining standards, not about race. I meet all your written standards, Elaine pointed out. I have a good job. I can afford the house and I'm maintaining it well. Yet someone still called the police on me. Why do you think that is? Neither Miller answered. From inside, Elaine could hear her niece and nephew laughing. I need to get back to my family, she said. I've given the reporter my statement already and I have no plans to contact her again. What happens next is out of my hands. The barbecue next weekend, Mr. Miller said suddenly. We hope you'll still come. It would send a positive message about community harmony. Elaine almost laughed at the phrase. I'll think about it, she said instead. Good evening. She went back inside to find Andre standing just inside the door, clearly having overheard most of the conversation. He raised his eyebrows but said nothing as they rejoined the others in the kitchen. Dinner was a lively affair, with the children chattering about school and Kendra sharing stories from her classroom, where she taught high school chemistry. For a few hours, Elaine was able to put aside the neighborhood drama and simply enjoy being with family in her new home. After they left, Elaine checked her email and found a message from Chief Walsh of the Westlake Police Department, formally apologizing for the unnecessary response call to her residents and assuring her that the department would be reviewing their protocols for responding to suspicious person reports. There was also an email from Vanessa Wright, thanking her for the statement and letting her know the story would run in tomorrow's paper. The suggested headline was, Mayor experiences racial profiling in exclusive neighborhood. Elaine sighed. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. She was preparing for bed when her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Not all of us are like them. Welcome to the neighborhood. A group of your neighbors. Attached was a photo of a gift basket sitting on her front porch. Elaine went to the door and found a large basket filled with wine, chocolates, garden tools, and gift cards to local shops. A card was attached with signatures from 12 different neighbors, most names she didn't recognize. As she carried the basket inside, Elaine felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a path forward after all. The next morning, Elaine woke early and dressed carefully for work, knowing there would be extra attention on her today. As she left the house, she noticed a car idling across the street. Another reporter. Most likely, the Westlake Gazette was in her driveway, and the headline was exactly as Vanessa had warned. Mayor experiences racial profiling in exclusive neighborhood. Below it was a subheading. Incident raises questions about inclusivity in Oak Ridge Hills. Elaine picked up the paper and tucked it under her arm without reading further. She had work to do, a city to run. The neighborhood drama would have to wait. As she backed out of her driveway, she noticed Mrs. Reynolds watching from her window, her expression unreadable. Elaine gave her a small, polite nod before driving away. The battle for acceptance wasn't over, but Elaine had faced tougher challenges before. One way or another, she would make this house her home. By Friday, the story had spread well beyond the Westlake Gazette. Local TV stations had picked it up, and Elaine had declined interview requests from 3 different channels. Even a national news website had run a short piece titled, "Small City Mayor Faces Big City Problem, Racial Profiling in Her Own Neighborhood." At City Hall, Elaine maintained her usual schedule, refusing to let the media attention distract her from her work. Most of her staff knew better than to mention the incident. Though she caught the occasional sympathetic glance or overheard whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, only Thomas, her chief of staff, dared to bring it up directly during their afternoon briefing. "The communications team has prepared a statement if you change your mind about addressing this publicly," he said, sliding a folder across her desk. Elaine left it untouched. "I've said all I plan to say on the matter." "Fair enough," Thomas nodded. "But you should know it's having an impact. The housing department reports a surge of interest in our fair housing initiatives, and 3 council members want to discuss diversity training for neighborhood associations." "Good," Elaine said. "If something positive comes from this, I won't stand in the way. I just don't want to be the poster child for it." As she drove home that evening, Elaine realized she was dreading the Millers' barbecue the next day. She had nearly decided to skip it when her phone rang through the car speakers. It was Diane. "Are you coming tomorrow?" Diane asked without preamble. "I haven't decided," Elaine admitted. "It feels like it would be awkward." "Oh, it absolutely will be," Diane agreed with a laugh. "That's why you have to come. Patty and I will be there. So will at least 10 other neighbors who signed the gift basket card. You won't be alone." Elaine smiled despite herself. "You make a compelling argument." "Besides," Diane continued, "Mrs. Reynolds is apparently beside herself trying to figure out what to say to you. Patty's husband overheard her practicing apologies in her garden. It might be worth going just to see that." "I don't want apologies," Elaine said. "I just want to be treated like any other homeowner." "Well, that ship has sailed," Diane pointed out. "You're now the most famous resident in Oak Ridge Hills history. The neighborhood Facebook group has never been so active." After they hung up, Elaine drove the rest of the way home deep in thought. When she pulled into her driveway, she was surprised to see Officer Chen from the police department standing on her porch. "Mayor Carter," the officer said as Elaine approached. "I hope I'm not intruding." "I'm off duty." "Not at all," Elaine said, unlocking her front door. "Would you like to come in?" Officer Chen followed her inside. "I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to apologize personally for Sunday's incident." "There's no need," Elaine said, setting her briefcase down. "You were just doing your job." "That's just it," Officer Chen said, looking uncomfortable. "The call should have been screened better. The dispatcher should have asked more questions. When the caller described someone tampering with property, they should have asked if the caller had verified that the person didn't live there." Elaine studied the young officer. "Do you normally follow up like this?" "No," Officer Chen admitted. "But I've been thinking a lot about it all week. I'm taking classes in criminal justice at the community college, and we just had a whole unit on bias in policing." She paused. "The thing is, when we got the call, I didn't question it. I just assumed the caller was right to be concerned. And now?" "Now I'm questioning a lot of things," Officer Chen said, "including how many other calls I've responded to without thinking about the assumptions behind them." Elaine nodded slowly. "That's a good question to ask. Anyway," Officer Chen said, "I just wanted you to know that this incident has had an impact at the department. Chief Walsh has ordered a review of all our protocols for suspicious person calls." After Officer Chen left, Elaine changed out of her work clothes and heated up leftovers for dinner. She ate on the back porch, enjoying the evening birdsong and the gentle lights she'd strung around the yard. Her phone buzzed with a text from Andre. "Saw your neighborhood drama made the news again." "You okay?" "All good," she replied. "Actually thinking of attending a neighborhood barbecue tomorrow." "Brave woman," came his response. "Want backup?" "I've got it covered," she assured him. "But thanks." The next day dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for an outdoor gathering. Elaine spent the morning working in her garden, planting new flowers along the side of the house. Around noon, Diane texted to say she and Patty would pick her up at 3:30 for the barbecue. "Safety in numbers," Diane wrote. "Plus, we can make a quick exit together if needed." Elaine smiled at her phone. She hadn't expected to make friends so quickly in her new neighborhood, especially given the rocky start. Yet here were 2 women willing to stand by her side at what promised to be an uncomfortable social event. As she showered and changed, Elaine considered what to bring to the barbecue. The Millers had said to bring nothing, but showing up empty-handed felt wrong. She finally decided on a bouquet of flowers from her garden and a bottle of wine. When Diane's car pulled up, Elaine was ready. Patty was in the front passenger seat, and both women greeted her warmly. "Ready for the lion's den?" Patty asked as Elaine climbed into the back seat. "As ready as I'll ever be," Elaine said. "Thanks for the escort." "We've been strategizing," Diane said, driving the short distance to the Miller's house. "If anyone says anything inappropriate, Patty is going to spill her drink on them. And if that doesn't work, Diane will fake a medical emergency," Patty added with a grin. "She's a doctor, so she's very convincing." The Millers' backyard was already filled with neighbors when they arrived. Conversations paused briefly as Elaine entered, then resumed with a slightly higher pitch, like an orchestra that had momentarily lost its rhythm. Mr. Miller approached immediately, taking the flowers and wine with exaggerated thanks. "Mayor Carter, so glad you could make it. Let me introduce you around." "I think many people here already know who I am," Elaine said dryly. "Yes, well," he stammered. "Drinks are over there. Food is on the back table. Make yourself at home." As he hurried away, Diane leaned in. "He's terrified of you." "It's wonderful." The three women made their way to the drinks table, where they were joined by several other neighbors. Some Elaine recognized from the gift basket card, while others were new faces. To her surprise, the conversation flowed easily, with no mention of the police incident or the subsequent media coverage. As the afternoon progressed, Elaine found herself genuinely enjoying the gathering. She met a retired professor who lived at the end of the street, a young couple who had moved in just a month before she did, and several other neighbors who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. Not everyone was friendly. Mrs. Reynolds kept to the opposite side of the yard, and a few of the older residents exchanged whispers when they thought Elaine wasn't looking. But they were the minority. Elaine was chatting with the young couple about their renovation plans when Mrs. Miller approached, looking nervous. "Mayor Carter, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Elaine excused herself and followed Mrs. Miller to a quiet corner of the yard. "I owe you an apology," Mrs. Miller said stiffly. "It was I who called the police last Sunday." Elaine wasn't entirely surprised. "I see. I want you to know that I didn't. That is to say, it wasn't because—" Mrs. Miller struggled to find the right words. "Wasn't because I'm black?" Elaine suggested. Mrs. Miller flushed. "I would have called about anyone I didn't recognize working on the Peterson house. We've had vandalism in the past." "But you did recognize me," Elaine pointed out. "We had met just days before." "You knew I had purchased the house." Mrs. Miller looked away. "I didn't recognize you in those clothes. You looked different than when we met." "I looked like someone who didn't belong in your neighborhood," Elaine said quietly. Mrs. Miller didn't respond directly. "I want you to know that I've withdrawn my complaint to the neighborhood association about your solar lights," she said instead. "And I've resigned as chair of the architectural review committee." "That's not necessary," Elaine said. "It is," Mrs. Miller insisted. "My husband and I have lived here for 30 years. We thought we were protecting something important by being selective about who joined our community, but this week has made me question that." Elaine studied the older woman, surprised by her candor. "Change isn't easy," she acknowledged. "For any of us," Mrs. Miller nodded. "No, it isn't, but perhaps it's necessary." She hesitated, then added, "I truly am sorry about calling the police." "I appreciate that," Elaine said, "and I accept your apology." As Mrs. Miller walked away, Diane approached with a fresh drink for Elaine. "Everything okay over here? Need me to create a diversion?" Elaine smiled. "No, everything's fine. Actually, I think it might be better than fine." Later, as the sun began to set and the party wound down, Elaine found herself sitting around the fire pit with a mixed group of neighbors, sharing stories about their first homes and the challenges of moving. The first month in any new house, something always breaks, the retired professor was saying. "For me, it was the water heater. Flooded the whole basement. Mine was the air conditioning," another neighbor added. "Middle of July, too." "I'm still waiting for my first disaster," Elaine said with a laugh. "Though I did find out the upstairs bathroom sink drips." "Old houses always have quirks," Mr. Miller said, joining the conversation as he added wood to the fire. "When we first moved in, the previous owner had left all sorts of strange things behind. We found a collection of antique doorknobs in the attic. I found a box of old letters in my attic, Elaine said. From the 1940s. I haven't had time to read them all yet, but they're fascinating. You should bring them to the Historical Society, suggested another neighbor. They keep records of all the old families in the area. The conversation continued to flow easily, touching on neighborhood history, renovation tips, and local restaurants worth trying. Politics and current events, including the recent media coverage, remained untouched topics, as if by unspoken agreement. As the evening grew cooler, people began to leave. Elaine thanked the Millers for their hospitality, receiving a warmer response than she had expected. Walking home with Diane and Patty under a sky filled with stars, Elaine felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since moving in. "So, verdict on the neighborhood?" Diane asked. "Still glad you moved here?" Elaine considered the question. "I think so," she said finally. "It's not perfect. There's still work to do, but there's potential." "That's true of most places," Patty observed, "and most people. Besides," Diane added, "you've already made history here. First black woman mayor, first black homeowner on this street, and first neighbor to make the national news in decades." "When you put it that way," Elaine laughed. "How could I possibly leave?" As they reached her house, Elaine looked up at its solid presence against the night sky. What had started as simply a place to live was becoming something more, a statement, a challenge, and now finally beginning to feel like home. "Same time next week?" Diane asked as they said goodnight. "We're thinking of starting a book club. Nothing fancy, just an excuse to drink wine and gossip." "I'd like that," Elaine said. "Though, fair warning, being friends with the mayor might put you in the spotlight too." "Worth the risk," Patty declared. Besides, the neighborhood could use a little shaking up. Watching them drive away, Elaine felt grateful for their friendship and for the surprising turns life sometimes took. What had begun with suspicion and a humiliating police call had somehow created openings for genuine connection. Change was rarely easy or straightforward, but sometimes, Elaine thought as she unlocked her front door, it was absolutely necessary, for herself, for her new neighbors, and for all the people who might follow in her footsteps, making homes in places where they hadn't been welcome before.